The sun had barely risen over the sprawling plantation when a new presence stirred the air, pulling the gaze of every worker in the fields. Dust rose in thin clouds as the carriage approached the main house, its polished wheels crunching on the gravel like a warning. Inside, a young man sat upright, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes, sharp, calculating, scanned every detail of the estate he had just purchased a part of. She stepped down first, her small frame almost delicate against the towering carriage. But there was a quiet fire in her posture, the way she held her head, the subtle grace in her steps. She was a slave, yes, but not one to be dismissed easily. The murmurs of the overseers and older slaves whispered her beauty, her intelligence, and, most dangerously, the flicker of defiance in her dark eyes. The master watched from the veranda, his hands gripping the railing with a strength that betrayed his usual control. He had overseen the arrival of countless slaves before, but this one, she unsettled him. It wasn't fear, he was a man used to dominance, but something deeper, something he had long buried beneath authority and expectation. She carried herself like a storm held in a teacup, restrained yet undeniable. "Bring her forward," he commanded, his voice calm but edged with a subtle tension. The young slave obeyed, her eyes briefly meeting his, and in that instant, an unspoken understanding passed between them. She would survive here not by bending entirely, but by walking the knife's edge of obedience and subtle manipulation. And he realized he could not look away. The day was long and unforgiving. She was assigned to the house, learning the precise rituals expected of a domestic slave, the careful polishing of silver, the arrangement of linens, the preparation of meals to exacting standards. Yet even in this ordinary labor, she caught his attention. A tilt of her head, the way her fingers moved deftly, the faint sigh that betrayed the human behind the perfection, it haunted him. By midday, the master had returned to his study, ostensibly to attend to business matters. Yet he found himself watching from the doorway, observing her methodical work. Every movement seemed orchestrated to test him, to pull him into some forbidden contemplation he dared not acknowledge aloud. Even the house staff sensed it. Whispers floated across the halls, eyes darting to the master whenever she passed, noting the tension in his stance, the subtle tightening of his jaw. They did not speak of desire openly, it was a dangerous thing, but all understood the dangerous orbit she had entered. As the evening sun lowered, casting long shadows across the plantation, the master found himself wandering to the veranda once more. She had finished her tasks for the day and was resting briefly before the evening chores. He lingered, pretending to enjoy the breeze, but the truth was inescapable, he was drawn to her, against every law of propriety, against every social expectation he had ever known. She sensed his gaze, of course. There was no denying it, not in her world or in his. And in that brief exchange of glances, a silent game began, one of power, temptation, and unspoken desire. She would survive by playing it carefully, he would suffer in silence, caught in the gravity of something he had never intended to feel. Before we continue with our story, I'd like to ask, if you're fascinated by these tales that blur the line between historical fact and legend, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button so you never miss a story. Please leave a comment telling us which town or city you're watching from, we love to know where our community of mystery seekers is located. Now, let's continue. The morning light seeped through the tall windows of the main house, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits in the golden beams. The plantation was waking, but inside the house, the rhythm of domestic life moved at a quieter, sharper pace. She was already up, carrying herself with that careful balance of diligence and subtle self-possession that seemed to irritate and fascinate him in equal measure. The master stood at the top of the grand staircase, observing silently. His presence was commanding, as always, but today there was a new edge, a tautness born from a restless curiosity. He had spent the night thinking of her, replaying her gestures, her glances, the way she had met his eyes with neither fear nor total submission. Something about her defiance, restrained yet unmistakable, gnawed at him. "Bring the silverware to the dining hall," he commanded, his tone crisp and controlled. She moved swiftly, but there was no tremor in her hands, no hesitation in her steps. And yet, in the slight tilt of her head as she passed him, there was a challenge. He felt it instinctively, a quiet reminder that she was not just property to be managed. She was something else entirely, something alive and unpredictable. The first test came unexpectedly. A guest arrived, an old business associate of the master, a man used to flattery and obedience. He was shown into the drawing room, and the young slave was tasked with serving refreshments. Every motion had to be precise, every gesture measured to the exact standard of etiquette the master demanded. Yet in the subtle way she offered the tea, the slight deflection of her gaze, and the carefully timed pauses in her movements, she tested him. Would he interfere, correcting her like every other slave he had ever commanded? Or would he allow this small display of individuality to persist? He did not act. He could not. He felt the tension coil in his chest like a living thing, a mixture of frustration, intrigue, and something far more dangerous. Each time she glanced in his direction, she seemed to probe the limits of his control, and he found himself wanting, not to punish her, but to see just how far this quiet power would go. The guest left, none the wiser, yet the master remained rooted in the room, watching her retreat to her tasks. And she, in turn, moved with a confidence that suggested she knew exactly the effect she had on him. It was a silent battle, one that would define their relationship in ways neither of them could yet name. By midday, whispers of her presence began circulating among the house staff. They had always been careful, wary of the master's temper, yet even they noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor, an unusual hesitance, a softness in his gaze reserved for no other. The young slave, fully aware of the stir she had caused, carried on with her work as though nothing had changed, even though everything had. In the late afternoon, the master found himself lingering near the veranda again, ostensibly reviewing ledgers, but in truth, watching her from a distance. She moved among the rooms with effortless grace, attending to her duties, yet each step, each glance, seemed to pull at some hidden part of him he had long denied. It was dangerous. It was forbidden. And he could not, would not, look away. By the time evening fell, the tension in the house was palpable. She retired to her quarters briefly, yet he knew, even from afar, that their connection had already begun to shape the dynamics of the household. Something unspoken had passed between them, an understanding of power, desire, and the subtle games that would define the days to come. The morning fog clung to the fields like a silken veil, softening the edges of the plantation but doing nothing to ease the tension within the house. The master had barely slept, his mind restless with thoughts of her. Each task she performed seemed to echo in his mind long after it was done, the memory of her movements burning in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. She was assigned to oversee the preparation of the evening banquet, a task usually reserved for senior domestic slaves. The choice seemed deliberate, an opportunity to test her composure under scrutiny, but she met the challenge with a quiet determination that only heightened his fascination. Every gesture was meticulous, precise, and yet there was a subtle improvisation in the way she arranged the silver, aligned the crystal glasses, and carried trays through the narrow corridors. It was artistry masquerading as labor, and he watched from a distance, unable to suppress the pull she exerted over him. The first real test of their unspoken game came when a vase of rare flowers was knocked over by accident. A servant nearby gasped, expecting a punishment, but she merely bent to right the vase, her movements measured, her eyes momentarily meeting his across the room. That single glance carried a weight he couldn't define, a mixture of audacity and acknowledgement. The master felt an unusual tightness in his chest. He wanted to reprimand her, to remind her of the rules that governed every corner of his estate, yet something in her defiance held him back. He found himself observing her more closely, noting the subtle curves of her expression, the way her fingers lingered on the table edge, the faint flush on her cheeks that no laborious task should have produced. It was during this delicate dance of observation that the slave made her move, though he didn't yet recognize it as one. A minor error in the arrangement of silver caught his attention, and he started toward her, expecting to correct her as he had so many times before. Yet before he could speak, she looked up and offered a small, enigmatic smile, an acknowledgement of her awareness of his scrutiny. In that brief moment, the power dynamic shifted imperceptibly. She had tested him, and he had hesitated. The rest of the day unfolded under a veil of tension. Every glance, every subtle gesture, became part of a dangerous game neither could afford to misstep. Even the house staff sensed the change. They whispered quietly among themselves, careful not to draw the master's ire, yet unable to ignore the quiet storm brewing within the walls. By evening, the banquet was underway. Guests arrived, the aroma of roasted meats and fresh-baked bread filling the grand dining hall. She moved among them with effortless poise, serving without error, all while maintaining that intangible aura that drew eyes to her, not just the master's, but everyone's. He watched, knowing it was no longer merely curiosity that bound his gaze. Desire had taken root, and it was as consuming as it was forbidden. He excused himself early from the gathering, retreating to the veranda where he could watch the grounds and, more importantly, watch her in a moment of quiet solitude. She paused at a corner of the hall, adjusting a chair with careful attention, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, of the effect she had on him. He stood in silence, knowing the next steps would require restraint he might not possess. That night, the plantation felt heavier, charged with the unspoken tension between master and slave. Neither could deny the dangerous connection forming, a bond built on subtle defiance, calculated observation, and the first threads of obsession. It was a game neither could walk away from, and the rules had yet to be fully written. The storm came in the afternoon. Not with thunder at first, but with wind that bent the sugarcane into whispering waves and clouds that bruised the sky into shades of iron. The plantation slowed under its weight, workers driven indoors or into sheds, shutters drawn across the main house like blinking eyelids. Inside, corridors darkened. Lamps were lit earlier than usual. Shadows stretched long and theatrical across the floors, and the master found himself restless, pacing his study while rain began tapping the windows with impatient fingers. He had signed papers, corrected tallies, dismissed an overseer. None of it stayed in his mind. She did. He heard her before he saw her, soft footsteps, the faint clink of a tray. When she passed his open doorway, he looked up. She wore a plain work dress, sleeves rolled neatly, hair bound back. Yet there was something about the way she moved today, more deliberate, like a dancer who knows the audience is watching. "Come here," he said before he could stop himself. The words dropped into the corridor like a stone into water. She paused. Slowly turned. "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady. Too steady. She stepped into the study, rainlight flickering behind her through the tall windows. The room smelled of leather and ink and polished wood, a space built for authority. He stood behind his desk, hands braced against its edge, suddenly aware of how close she was. "You were assigned to the West Hall," he said. "I finished early." A simple answer. Clean. Efficient. His eyes searched her face for something, guilt, perhaps. Or uncertainty. He found neither. Only that same quiet composure that had begun to haunt him. He gestured to the shelves behind him. "Dust those." She moved past him to obey, close enough that he caught the faint scent of soap and rain on her clothes. His jaw tightened. He turned away too late, already aware that the air in the room had changed, grown dense and electric, as if the storm outside had leaked indoors. She worked in silence. The brush whispered over spines of books. Wood creaked beneath her shifting weight. Every sound landed sharply in his ears. Then he noticed it. One of the ledgers on his desk had been moved. Not far. Just enough to break the perfect alignment he kept without thinking. He turned. "Did you touch that?" She stopped brushing. Looked at the book. Looked back at him. "Yes, sir." His brows knit. "I did not instruct you to. I thought it was in the way." A breath passed between them. Slow. Measured. "You thought," he repeated. "I did." It was the first time she had answered him without lowering her gaze. Not openly defiant. Just, level. Honest in a way that scraped against the rules that governed the house. Something in him stirred, sharp and dangerous. "You are here to follow orders," he said. Her chin lifted a fraction. "I am." Not an argument. A declaration. He took a step toward her before he realized he was moving. She did not retreat. Rain drummed harder against the windows, filling the space between them with a steady, insistent rhythm. For a moment, they stood far too close. Close enough that he could see a tiny scar near her collarbone. Close enough that her breathing became visible, subtle but quicker than before. "You are bold," he said quietly. Her lips curved. Not a smile. Something more cautious. "Only when necessary." The answer struck him harder than any insult would have. He should have dismissed her. Sent her away. Restored the distance that kept this world orderly and predictable. Instead, he said, "Who taught you to rearrange a man's desk?" "No one." "Then why do it?" She hesitated. "Just a beat. Because I could." The storm outside cracked with thunder, sudden and loud enough to make the windows tremble. Neither of them moved. That was the line. He felt it the instant the words left her mouth. Because I could. Not because she thought it helpful. Not because she feared punishment. Because she chose to. Something cold and fascinated coiled in his chest. "Leave," he said. The command was sharp. Final. She did not rush. She set the brush down carefully. Smoothed her dress. Walked past him toward the door with unhurried steps, as if daring him to change his mind. At the threshold, she paused. "Yes, sir." He didn't answer. Didn't turn. Didn't trust himself to. She left. But the room did not empty with her. Her presence lingered like heat after lightning, invisible and impossible to ignore. He stared at the displaced ledger, then at the rain streaking the glass, aware that something had shifted between them. She had not raised her voice. Had not disobeyed. Had not even touched him. Yet she had crossed a line all the same. And the most terrifying part was not that she knew it. It was that he had let her. Rumors did not travel loudly on the plantation. They drifted. Like smoke through floorboards. A glance held too long in the corridor. A task reassigned without explanation. A master who lingered near the kitchen instead of the fields. By the third morning after the storm, the house pulsed with quiet speculation, and she felt it everywhere, in the way other servants studied her when they thought she wasn't looking, in the sudden silences when she entered a room, in the overseer's narrowed eyes when her name was called for new duties. The master pretended not to notice. That was the lie he told himself as he signed ledgers he had already reviewed twice, dismissed workers with vague instructions, and walked the halls with an alertness that betrayed him. He had ordered distance after that afternoon in his study. Fewer direct errands. Fewer moments alone. It had not worked. If anything, the space made her loom larger in his mind, a phantom in plain daylight. So he did the worst possible thing. He brought her closer. The order came down just after breakfast. She was to assist with the inventory of imported goods, fabrics, tools, and spirits stored in the rear wing of the house, a position that required daily interaction with him or his steward. Senior servants blinked at the announcement. The overseer stiffened. She kept her face smooth, though something flickered behind her eyes, quick as a match struck in the dark. "Yes, sir," she said, when summoned to hear it. He watched her carefully for a reaction. Surprise, perhaps. Gratitude. Fear. She offered none. Only that steady calm that unsettled him more than protest ever could. The storerooms were cool and dim, heavy doors sealing away the heat. Dust floated in pale shafts of light as she followed him down the narrow aisle between stacked crates and folded bolts of cloth. The scent of cedar and liquor soaked into the air. "You will record what I dictate," he said. "I can read." He paused mid-step. That, too, was new. "Who taught you?" She met his gaze. "Someone who no longer lives here." Not defiant. Careful. He nodded once and continued walking, though the admission lodged in him like a splinter. They worked in close quarters, close enough that he heard the scratch of her pencil, close enough that her sleeve brushed his coat when she leaned to check a label. Every accidental touch landed with absurd force, a spark snapping across skin he pretended was not sensitive to her presence. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm season had not finished with them yet. "You are precise," he said at last. She did not look up. "I try to be." A pause. "Why?" That made her glance at him. "Because mistakes are punished." The truth of it sat between them, blunt and immovable. He found himself wanting to contradict it. Wanting to promise something he had no right to promise. Instead, he said nothing. The silence stretched until it grew heavy. By midday, sweat slicked his collar and her temples alike. He poured water from a pitcher and handed her a glass before thinking better of it. Their fingers brushed. She froze for half a heartbeat. So did he. Then she took it. "Thank you, sir." The words were correct. The look she gave him was not submissive at all. Across the plantation, eyes were watching. A maid passing the doorway slowed. The steward lingered longer than necessary near the entrance. The overseer made a note he did not share with anyone. That evening, the master stood alone on the veranda while the sky smoldered orange behind the fields. She passed below, carrying her ledger back to the records room. He called her name. She stopped. Looked up. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll continue the inventory." A flicker crossed her face this time. Satisfaction, perhaps. Or warning. "Yes, sir." When she walked away, he remained staring at the darkening cane, aware that the choice had already begun to ripple outward. Closer to him meant safer in some ways. And infinitely more dangerous in others. Behind the servants' quarters that night, whispers threaded themselves into sharper shapes. People spoke of favoritism. Of watching eyes. Of how quickly a master's interest could become a curse instead of a blessing. She lay awake long after the lamps dimmed, staring at the low ceiling, replaying every glance, every pause, every almost touch. She was not naive. She knew exactly how perilous his attention was. And yet. He lay awake too, staring into the dark, knowing he had crossed a boundary not with words or hands, but with paperwork and proximity. He had drawn her into his orbit. And the plantation, like a living thing, had begun to notice. The overseer had begun to follow her. Not openly. Not with the theatrical cruelty some men favored. This was quieter. A shadow near the storerooms. A pause by the kitchen door when she passed through with a ledger tucked under her arm. Questions asked of other servants in a tone that pretended to be casual. She noticed. People who had survived long enough on plantations learned to feel changes in the air the way sailors sense storms before clouds appeared. And something had shifted again. The master's new assignments had placed her in view, in hallways that echoed, in rooms where authority gathered. That kind of visibility bred danger. The master sensed it too. He heard the overseer's name too often in passing. Caught glimpses of him watching from railings or doorframes. Not boldly challenging. Studying. Measuring. It irritated him more than he liked to admit. During the third day of inventory, the overseer appeared in the storeroom doorway, arms folded, boots dusted with red earth. "Didn't know you were reassigning clerks," he said. The master did not look up from the crate list. "She's efficient." The overseer's gaze slid to her. lingered. She's new. So am I, the master replied coolly. That earned a thin smile. She kept writing, eyes on the page, though she felt the weight of that stare like a hand at her back. When the overseer left, the room seemed to exhale. You should work in the rear rooms tomorrow, the master said quietly, not looking at her. She understood immediately. Fewer eyes. Safer. Yes, sir. But safety on a plantation was never permanent. It only changed shape. That afternoon, a crate of imported rum went missing. Just one bottle, pried free with careful fingers. The steward discovered it during his count and brought the matter upward, voice stiff with unease. Theft was not treated lightly. It never had been. The master questioned workers from the storage wing. One by one. Voices low. Faces blank with fear. Then the overseer spoke the thought everyone else had avoided. She's been working closest to the stock. Silence thickened the air. The master felt it land like a blow. He turned slowly. Are you accusing her? I'm saying she had opportunity. Eyes slid toward her. She stood straight, hands folded in front of her, expression unreadable. But inside, calculation raced. Opportunity was often all men needed. I didn't take anything, she said. The overseer's smile returned. Didn't say you did. But the implication hovered like smoke. The master's voice hardened. Search the other workers. We will. The emphasis was pointed. Hours passed. No bottle surfaced. Tension wound tighter with every minute. By evening, the master dismissed everyone but her and the steward. You may go, he told the steward once the questions ended. When they were alone, she spoke first. You think it was me? He looked at her sharply. No. The answer came too fast to be calculated. She studied him. You didn't hesitate. That was dangerous. The noticing. He exhaled through his nose. You are not careless. And the others? I don't know. Which was the truth? Outside, voices drifted across the yard. The overseer laughing with two field hands. A sound that did not belong anywhere near this conversation. They're watching me, she said quietly. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. He stiffened. Who? Them. A beat. I noticed, he said. She met his eyes. Then why keep me there? The question cut closer than he expected. He could have said efficiency. He could have said coincidence. He could have said nothing at all. Instead he said, because you're useful. Half truth. Half cowardice. Her gaze sharpened. Being useful gets people hurt. He did not deny it. That night, he doubled patrols near the store wing without explanation. The overseer raised a brow but obeyed. In his room, long after the lamps were out, the master sat awake, listening to the distant insects and the faint churn of the fields in the wind. He had protected her. Subtly. Quietly. Enough that anyone paying close attention would notice. Across the quarters, she lay on her side, staring at the wall, replaying his voice when he had said no. No hesitation. No doubt. That was more frightening than accusation would have been. Because it meant he had chosen her. And once a master chose. Nothing stayed simple for long. The missing bottle never reappeared. By the third day, that alone was accusation enough. Plantations ran on fear as much as on labor, and theft was a crime that demanded a display. The overseer made sure the rumor spread before any verdict was spoken. Field hands murmured in the rows. Kitchen workers exchanged tight looks. Even the stable boys slowed when she passed, eyes sliding away too quickly. She felt the noose tightening long before anyone named it. The master noticed too. He saw how conversations died near her. How the overseer suddenly positioned himself at intersections she had to cross. How guards lingered longer near the store wing than anywhere else on the property. It was turning public. That was dangerous. He summoned the steward at dawn. Voices were kept low, doors shut. Orders given without explanation. Inventory checked again. Questioning widened. Nothing surfaced. Which made the overseer bolder. Late in the afternoon, while workers were being released from the fields, he called out across the yard. "You." She froze. Every head turned. "Come here." Her feet moved before her fear could argue. Gravel crunched under thin shoes as she crossed the open space, the sun hanging low and merciless overhead. The master stood on the veranda above them, papers in his hand, mid-conversation with a visiting merchant. The overseer's voice carried. "You were last assigned to the rum crates." "Yes, sir. And now one is missing." "I didn't take it." A ripple passed through the gathered workers. The overseer tilted his head. "Search her." The word cracked like a whip. 2 guards shifted. The master felt something snap tight behind his ribs. "No." The single syllable cut through the yard. Every face lifted to the veranda. The overseer turned slowly. "Sir." "I said no." Silence ballooned outward. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. "She's been cleared," the master continued. "You will stand down." The overseer's jaw flexed. "With respect, sir, we haven't finished." "You have." The merchant on the veranda pretended to be fascinated by the fields. No one else pretended anything. She stood very still, heart pounding loud enough she was certain someone could hear it. The overseer's eyes flicked to her, then back to the master. Something cold and amused passed through them. "As you say." He stepped back. But the retreat was theatrical. Temporary. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring in low currents. She did not move until the master gave a slight nod. Later, she was summoned to his study. The door closed behind her with a soft, deliberate click. "You should not have been questioned like that," he said. His voice was steady. His hands were not. One rested too long on the edge of his desk. "They would have searched me." "Yes." "A beat." "You stopped them." "I did." She studied him, something fierce and searching in her eyes. "Why?" The question was not respectful. He did not correct her. "Because there was no proof." She waited. The silence stretched thin as wire. "That's not all," she said. He did not answer. "You stood in front of everyone." "I gave an order." "You chose." The word hung between them. He took a slow breath. "Yes." It was the closest he had come to confession. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, relief leaking through control. Then anger slid in behind it, sharp and sudden. "They'll come for me again." "I know. They won't forget this." "No." He stepped closer before realizing he was doing it. Stopped an arm's length away. "I can't protect you from everything," he said quietly. She lifted her chin. "Then stop putting me where you have to." The truth in that landed hard. They stood too near. Too long. The room felt smaller than it had ever been, air thick with things neither of them were saying. Outside the window, workers crossed the yard, glancing up at the study without knowing why. He spoke first. "You are to avoid the store wing." "Then what?" "You'll work upstairs." Her eyes widened despite herself. Closer. More visible. More dangerous in a different way. "Sir," she said carefully, "that will make things worse." He knew it. And he was doing it anyway. "Do as I say." She held his gaze, searching for something. "Found too much." "Yes, sir." When she turned to leave, he caught himself just before reaching for her arm. The door shut behind her. He exhaled like a man coming up from underwater. Across the yard, the overseer watched the study window with narrowed eyes. Something had just been revealed. Not love. Not yet. But preference. And on a plantation, preference was a spark thrown into dry grass. The night did not come quietly. It slid over the plantation like ink spilled across paper, swallowing lantern light and muting the fields into vast, breathing shadows. Crickets sang too loudly. Dogs barked without reason. Somewhere far off, a horse stamped in its stall. The master stood at his bedroom window long after the house had settled, watching the glow of torches drift along the outer fence line. Patrols. His order. And yet unease crawled under his skin. He had made her visible. Again. Down in the servants' quarters, she sat on the edge of her narrow cot, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. The confrontation in the yard replayed again and again, the way the master's voice had cracked through the crowd, the overseer's smile when he backed away. She did not trust smiles like that. A soft knock touched the doorframe. It was Mara, a kitchen worker who had survived long enough to keep her head down and her ears open. "They're talking," Mara whispered. "Who?" "Men near the stables. Overseer's been drinking." Cold slid through her stomach. What kind of talking? The kind that comes after. She thanked her and lay back, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. If something happened, it would not be loud at first. It never was. Someone would accuse. Someone would drag. Someone would make an example. She had lived long enough to know the shape of those nights. In the main house, the master felt the same premonition without knowing why. He left his room, coat thrown over a nightshirt, boots unlaced. The halls were dark, servants asleep or pretending to be. He found the steward near the back stairwell. "Wake the guards on the south end," he said. "Sir." "Now." By the time torches flickered brighter near the quarters, a knot of men had already formed. Not large. 5 or 6. Enough. The overseer's voice floated above them, thick with drink. "She thinks she's protected," he was saying. "Let's see." The master arrived before the thought finished forming in anyone else's head. "Step away from the building." The words carried steel. The group turned. Some startled. Some irritated. The overseer blinked, then smiled. "Evening, sir. You will return to your rooms." "It's late," the overseer said mildly. "We were just talking." "Not here." The master's eyes cut to the guards he had summoned. They fanned out without speaking. She stood just inside the doorway, shadows clinging to her frame. He saw her then. Pale in lantern light. Watching him. The overseer followed his gaze. "Ah," he said softly. That was all it took. The master moved. One step forward. "This ends," he said. "Ends what?" "You using suspicion as sport." The overseer's smile thinned. "Careful." The word was almost gentle. The air went taut. "You forget who owns this land," the overseer added. The master's voice dropped. "You forget who runs it." A heartbeat stretched. Then the overseer laughed. "You'd risk your reputation over one slave." The sentence struck like a hammer. Silence swallowed the yard. The master did not look away. Yes. It was the first time he had said it out loud. Not to her. Not to himself. Not to anyone. The overseer stared at him, recalculating. "That's a dangerous confession." "I'm aware. People will talk. They already are." He gestured to the guards. "Disperse this." They did. Reluctantly. Quickly. The overseer lingered. "This isn't finished," he murmured. "No," the master agreed. But his eyes promised something else entirely. When the yard emptied, she was still standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. His breath left him in a slow exhale. "I know. You just painted a target on both of us." "Yes." She folded her arms. "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The lanterns guttered, throwing moving shadows across his face. "Because I couldn't let them touch you." There it was. Not poetry. Not romance. Truth. Her throat tightened. "That doesn't make me safe," she said. "No," he replied. "It makes you chosen." The word frightened them both. "What happens now?" she asked. He turned toward the house, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Now I change the rules. On a plantation. As much as a man can." She stared at him, searching for weakness, for manipulation, for the shape of a trap. Found instead something far more volatile. Resolve. He stopped at the foot of the veranda. "You will be moved to rooms inside the house," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "That will make them furious." "I don't care." "That's not wise." "I didn't say it was." A wind passed through the trees, rattling leaves like distant applause. "Or warning." She took a breath. "You can't keep doing this." "I already am." They stood there, master and slave, bound by a choice neither could undo. Above them, the plantation slept fitfully. Below them, something old and cruel had been challenged. And somewhere in the dark, consequences were already learning their way toward daylight.